coming here this afternoon and spending your time to learn about this critical human rights issue. We very much appreciate your concern, your support, and your interest by spending some time to come here and learn. The Armenian Legal Center is focused on two issues: one, getting retribution and compensation for the Armenian genocide, and secondly, protecting the rights of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, which we call Artsakh, which have been trampled upon by Azerbaijan. There are a number of issues there, but in particular this afternoon, we're focusing on the 23 prisoners who are being held in Bաքվում, who have been tortured, maltreated. 15 of them are POWs, and 8 of them are civilian officials of the government of Azerbaijan. I won't go into any more detail because our three distinguished speakers will provide much more insight than I possibly could. I'll give a brief introduction, and then each of them will speak for approximately 10 minutes, and after that we'll take some questions. Zidane Sahakian, who's the president of the International Comparative Law Center based in Yerevan, is also the executive director of the Armenian Legal Center for Justice and Human Rights. She is a legal expert who has extensive experience working in Armenia's judicial system, has served as an ad hoc judge for the European Court of Human Rights, and has advised the OSCE, ODIHR, UNICEF, Armenia, and the UNDP, and other international human rights organizations. In her current role, she has filed dozens of cases before the international courts on behalf of the Armenian prisoners subject to unlawful detention and abuse by Azerbaijan. She's compiled extensive documentation on human rights abuses and war crimes perpetrated during and since the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War, which was submitted to the Department of State Treasury last year to initiate a review of the applicability of sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act. And for those of you who are congressional staffers, Congresswoman Dina Titus and Congressman Gus Bilirakis introduced yesterday a bill calling upon the State Department to pursue the Magnitsky sanctions. So for those of you in the congressional office who are interested, you can contact one of their offices to become a co-sponsor. Jared Genzer is the managing director of Perseus Strategies. Genzer is an international human rights lawyer with decades of experience working to free political prisoners worldwide. He has served as pro bono counsel to 5 Nobel Peace Laureates, including 3 laureates who won their prize while imprisoned, as well as Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Elie Wiesel. Genzer currently serves as international legal advisor for Ruben Vardanyan, the former state minister of Nagorno-Karabakh, who has been in Azerbaijan's arbitrary detention since the genocidal ethnic cleansing of the region in September 2023. He's one of the 8 civilians in the 23. Karni Krikorian is the founding partner of Krikorian Dajani LLP, where he leads the firm's international and federal practice groups, focusing on complex litigation matters, Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act litigation, commercial sanctions regimes, and commercial transactions, both international and domestic. He presents regularly on matters of public international law, including before the International Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights. He is a member of the Armenian delegation to the International Criminal Court of Justice in Armenia's case against Azerbaijan. So I think you will see that these 3 individuals are experts in international law and are well qualified to speak on the issues at hand. So without further introduction, let me have Zidane speak. Each one of the speakers will speak for approximately 10 minutes.
Thank you. Let me first thank Armenian National Committee of America and Armenian Legal Center for raising voices for the justice of Armenian prisoners. I will start from historic record of Armenian the victims' violations by Azerbaijani government and how the international response incentivized Azerbaijan to commit more human rights violations. And as you know, in the early 2000s, Armenia and Azerbaijan, they became parties of key human rights instruments at the universal level, UN system, and at regional level. and they accepted core obligations, including the ones in Geneva. To respect a right of life, to provide effective judicial protection to all under their jurisdiction without discrimination on any basis. However, this pledge failed at first in European soil back in 2003 when Armenian officer was beheaded by Azerbaijani soldier Ramil Safarev, while Armenian soldier was in his sleep. And by the way, they were participants of organization under NATO, and this was a good possibility to show like peaceful coexistence between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So the Hungarian courts imposed life imprisonment, but after receiving huge Azerbaijani investments into Hungarian economy, a person was transferred to Azerbaijan and he was immediately pardoned, promoted, rewarded, and by the way, even President Aliyev opened a web page where he welcomed his citizens to greet the hero. So he was glorified, and the message at that time was quite straightforward for any Armenian. Killing an Armenian would be celebrated, not condemned. And from there, the numbers of beheadings rose. In April 2016, we had very short 4 days war with Azerbaijan, and during these hostilities, at least 3 Armenian soldiers were beheaded, 2 while still alive, despite the protections owed to captives under the Geneva Conventions. 4 years later, just 4 years later, during the 44 days war in 2020, the atrocity pattern widened to dozens of beheadings, now including civilians in their own homes and villages. So our organization documented at least 30 such cases, and some of these skinning beheading scenes were filmed by the perpetrators. They circulated widely, and this performative cruelty sought social reward in a climate where killing of Armenians was treated as heroism. So this question would rise: what was wrong with the international community's response that turned atrocity into an incentive? Fooling not only mass war crimes in 2020, but also aggression against Armenia. And right now, some part of Armenia is being occupied by Azerbaijan. And finally, forced deportation of Artsak's entire population from their land in September 2023. For the first time in history, we have Armenian land which does not have any single Armenian population. So we think that the price of the impunity, so this was the price of impunity. So war crimes, crimes against humanity, they were committed because of impunity. And of course, courts, to some extent, acknowledge these violations. Of course, we do have acknowledgement by the European Court of Human Rights, also in the case of Safarev, where the right to life violation is recognized. It also recognizes the role of ethnicity, which was the motive of this crime and impunity for the perpetrators. But while the legal process moved on judicial time, we think that Baku moved on battlefield time. So time became a weapon, and with no swift sanctions, Azerbaijan received territorial and political gains, while victims are waiting for judgments in future. And by 2025, we are still urging Azerbaijan to execute ECHR judgments. And they are deliberately fail to honor their obligations and act in compliance with international human rights tribunals' orders. And again, the question would arise: why and other related consequences? The mistake, I think, is structural, and we mistook process for power, and we withhold immediate political costs, which could be in the forms of sanctions. Instead of outsourcing responsibility to courts, which are slow in pace, and telling the victims to wait for formal justice, I think we have to resort to harder measures to show what is the cost of impunity. Right now, 23 Armenians are illegally held in Azerbaijan. By the way, 5 of them were taken into captivity in 2020. Other cases were reported from 2023. And all they face sham trials, and those charges are closely related to the conflict, to the exercise of right to self-determination by Artsakh population. So the actions, which are well protected by international law, are qualified as criminal activities within Azerbaijani courts. Though Azerbaijan tries to manipulate with the issue of the conflict, mainly positioning it as a territorial dispute, it remains an issue about a right to self-determination, and we have given authority from UN Security Council confirming that self-declaration of Artsakh independence was in line with international law, and these lawful actions cannot lead to criminal liability, while we have 8 former leaders who are right now facing charges. And I would like to recall some of these Security Council resolutions. So when the situation is being considered by Security Council, they also discuss whether self-declaration of independence is in line with international law, it is valid or no. And if they have doubts about validity of self-declaration, a strong tool exists, which is called collective call for non-recognition. Unlike to Artsakh situation, Security Council resorted to this collective call for non-recognition in a Cyprus case. For example, it explicitly deplored that declaration of the Turkish Cypriot authorities of the cessation of part of the Republic of Cyprus is invalid, and then Security Council called upon all states not to recognize any Cyprus state other than the Republic of Cyprus. And we have seen the same tool used in the case of Southern Rhodesia, even a very direct call to all states not to entertain any diplomatic and other relations with that state. The Security Council found self-declaration of Artsakh valid. There was no ban on international community to enter into diplomatic and any other form of relations, and those 8 leaders, they just represented their own population, people in these external relations, and right now they face charges because of these lawful activities. Many organizations, including Human Rights Watch, they reported about torture, mistreatment of Armenian prisoners in Baku. The main evidence is testimonies received by repatriated prisoners. Right now we have around 200 Armenians which were released and returned to Armenia. So they provide quite detailed accounts of their treatment in Azerbaijan. We have also corroborating evidence in the form of medical examinations, protocols which confirm the injuries received at the time of their detention in Azerbaijan. Systematically subject to ill treatment, serious forms of torture, physical and psychological. So far, no torture prevention body was able to access Azerbaijan and see and monitor the conditions of Armenian prisoners. Within Council of Europe, we have this torture prevention committee. However, access was denied, and we have strong condemnation by this committee for putting obstacles for their own operations. The only neutral organization which provided humanitarian support to Armenians was ICRC. However, in the beginning of this year, Azerbaijan formally informed about its intention to suspend the activities of this humanitarian organization, which operates safely worldwide without any obstacles, and maybe in complex situations compared to Nagorno. The last visit was conducted in June. Since June, we don't have any verifiable information from independent sources about the conditions of Armenian prisoners. So right now they are in full isolation without any physical immediate contact with external world. And since September, completely the offices are closed. ICRC office is closed in Azerbaijan. We have heard from ICRC that the attempts to secure visits by their other regional offices was not successful. So Azerbaijan not only closed operation, but refuses to grant access to regional representatives to have these short-term visits to Armenians. Maybe I'll stop here and pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much to the Armenian National Committee of America, the Armenian Legal Center, and my fellow panelists. It's an honor to join all of you this afternoon to talk about these important issues. In my remarks, I'm going to provide some important information about the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh and the plight of my client, Ruben Vardanyan, a former state councilor and one of 8 Armenian Christian political prisoners detained by Azerbaijan. As Sirius was just describing as well, there are an additional 15 prisoners of war detained, and in fact there are other Armenian prisoners that have been detained for longer periods of time. As has been discussed, there's been a long-standing campaign by Azerbaijani officials to remove the presence of Armenian Christians in Nagorno-Karabakh, a region in the South Caucasus, which of course Armenians call Artsakh, and that name dates back literally thousands of years. The efforts by Azerbaijan to cleanse the territory of Armenian Christians, of course, culminated in the September 23 ethnic cleansing, when President Aliyev launched this offensive, which led to the forcible transfer of 100,000 Armenians across the border back into Armenia from Azerbaijan. Since the ethnic cleansing, Azerbaijan has accelerated its efforts to remove any trace of Armenian Christian historic sites and monuments. Thousands of them have been destroyed, and lots of different NGOs have provided information about that, including the Center for Truth and Justice. And I think that this only underlies the attitude of Aliyev and his regime towards Armenians in general and the Armenian former residents of Nagorno-Karabakh. It's in this context that my client, Ruben Vardanyan, was arbitrarily arrested and detained by the Azerbaijan government nearly 2 years ago this month. A devout Christian and respected philanthropist and businessman, Ruben was taken as a political prisoner trying to flee the ethnic cleansing in September 2023, Its only crime was advocating for the dignity and right to self-determination for the Armenian Christian people of Nagorno-Karabakh. He now faces life in prison if convicted by the Baku military court on more than 40 fabricated charges, which include planning and waging a war of aggression, violating the laws and customs of war, smuggling and financing terrorism. Outrageous. As just one example, Ruben co-founded and serves on the board of directors of the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, an independent NGO that is audited independently, that helps those in need around the world. Yet Azerbaijan has asserted that this NGO has been a vehicle for Ruben to finance terrorism. His trial has also been a mockery of justice, with egregious due process abuses violating the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. First, there's a right, of course, to be tried without delay, and Ruben's detention began in September 2023, and the trial only began since January, a year and a half later. In addition, international law says very clearly that a civilian cannot be tried in a military tribunal, so the entire set of proceedings themselves are in fact, on a prima facie basis, illegal and in violation of international law. Since then, there have been 35 hearings in the case that have been rife with grave irregularities. So, for example, all of the hearings have been closed to the public, and you have a right to a public trial. The court has failed to provide Ruben with an interpreter at various times, even after a judge's summons, and he's also never really had full access even to a translated copy of the very lengthy indictment. Amnesty International and other NGOs have highlighted the travesties of this trial, noting that the majority of documents have been provided to Ruben in Azeri, a language he doesn't even understand, and when there have been some translations provided in Russian, they're enormous and highly material translation errors. In almost every hearing, now 35 of them, dozens of alleged victims have been brought out to testify to the injuries and casualties that they suffered at the hands of the Armenian armed forces and so-called illegal armed formations. But all of the witnesses have confirmed that they do not know Ruben, have never seen him, have never met him, and only heard about him through media and social networks. No factual evidence, literally none, has been presented to link Ruben to any of the incidents described, yet each testimony has been added to the court record, numbering now in the hundreds. And yet all of this so-called evidence would be thrown out of any court in which the rule of law prevails as inadmissible hearsay. But not, of course, before this secret military tribunal. He's also been denied access to me as his international lawyer, violating his right to counsel of his own choosing. I wrote repeatedly to the Azerbaijan government to try to seek to visit him and to talk to him about the international law violations happening in his case, and never received any response. These serious due process abuses also violate Azerbaijan's own constitution and criminal procedure code. Yet the military tribunal has refused to grant motions that were designed to address these violations, and they've even totally ignored 25 other additional motions that were made, even though under Azerbaijan's criminal procedure code, all motions made by a party to the proceedings, including the defense, must actually be taken up and decided on the basis of an evaluation of those motions in accordance with Azerbaijan law, the criminal law, and the criminal procedure law within 3 days of receipt. 25 of them totally ignored. Despite President Aliyev's claim that Ruben is a terrorist and his imprisonment has nothing to do with being an Armenian Christian, something he said all around the world to people who've asked him about Ruben's case and the case of other prisoners, Ruben and the others have all been repeatedly denied access to the Bible. Ruben was also subjected to torture during his first of 2 hunger strikes he conducted to protest his and the imprisonment of the other Armenian prisoners. He was placed in a punishment cell with the lights on 24/7, forced to stand, forbidden to bathe, and even deprived of food and water for several days. The situation, as Sirnish was describing, for the other Armenian political prisoners and POWs is very much the same, as best as we understand it. They face prison conditions that are very similar, and they're all being put on trial in secret proceedings of this kind. Where do we go from here? Before taking office in his second term, President Trump has stated that what President Aliyev had done in Nagorno-Karabakh was an ethnic cleansing and that he would stand for persecuted Christians. Earlier this year, the Trump administration said it would adopt tougher sanctions against Azerbaijan, including sanctions and various other channels of diplomatic pressure. But in recent weeks, as you know well, the situation has shifted substantially. Just over a month ago in early August, President Trump hosted President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan at the event at the White House to sign the joint peace declaration in an agreement brokered by the United States. Of course, there's every reason to praise this new agreement. As a general proposition, peace is much better than the alternative, and it's very important for the security, most especially of the Armenian people. But at the same time, however, sustainable peace can only be achieved if there is justice that comes with that peace. And unfortunately, or the POWs. And the situation remains very worrying, as Sirinish was noting, with the fact that the International Committee of the Red Cross has just had to close their operations in September after being expelled by the government of Azerbaijan. And as Anka noted in their congressional memo in August, the ICRC was the only entity authorized to visit Armenian prisoners, making now the monitoring of their well-being substantially more difficult, if not impossible. While we had hoped that the release of the prisoners would be part of the peace agreement, senior officials in the Trump administration, beginning with the president himself, have indicated that the plight of the Armenian Christians remains a top priority. This commitment was made public by President Trump during his meeting on August 8th at the White House, the bilateral meeting between him and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, in which President Trump stated he would personally ask President Aliyev to release the 23 Armenian prisoners. That said, in my experience, having taken up cases like this all around the world, dictators don't simply release prisoners because they're asked to. They only do so when they have to, and when doing so is the least worst option to save face among mounting pressure, and only in situations where the consequences for releasing the prisoners is better than than the alternative, in keeping them. To compel President Aliyev to release the prisoners, the Trump administration, the U.S. Congress, and other like-minded multilateral organizations, governments, NGOs, and the media must continue to employ every tool at their disposal to ensure President Trump's commitment rapidly becomes a reality. And I'm more than happy during the Q&A to speak further about ways that one can think about doing so in the most effective way possible. And again, thanks for the invitation, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jared. Ernie? Maybe I'll use this here. Yes, thank you to the ANCA and the Armenian Legal Center, and it's a pleasure for me to join Siranush and Jared on this panel. We stand at a moment when the conscience of nations is being tested, not in the abstract, but in the very real lives of people whose survival hangs in the balance. You heard some of those stories from my co-panelists. Real people who are tortured and tormented, real people who are uprooted and displaced, real people who are actively being erased. Armenia has brought before the International Court cases that don't seek power or territory or vengeance, but something far more fundamental. The protection of life itself, the defense of dignity, and importantly, the recognition of truth. Armenia's state cases at the ICJ and the European Court of Human Rights are not academic filings, they're not gestures in diplomatic theater. They're urgent appeals demanding that the Armenian people not be erased by starvation, deportation, denial, or silence. Let's take the ICJ case, Armenia versus Azerbaijan, for example. It's brought under CERD, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. But what is CERD? Let's think about this. Why does it matter? CERD was formulated for a very specific purpose. It is a stopgap measure to prevent genocide. That's what the convention does. It's to stop genocide before genocide takes place. It's a proactive measure to prevent genocide. That's the case brought by Armenia against Azerbaijan. And Armenia is winning those cases. Even today, key orders are in effect. Artsakh Armenians today must be allowed access in both directions in the Lachin corridor between Armenia and Artsakh to return to their homes. That's an effective order of the ICJ. Here's another one. Azerbaijan must stop the destruction of Armenian cultural heritage. Or here's another one. Azerbaijan must stop promoting and stoking Armenophobia, hatred against Armenians. from the highest levels of the Azerbaijani government. That's in the order. The ICJ noting that Armenophobia, that racial discrimination against Armenians, is coming from the highest levels of the Azerbaijani government. It is state policy. And let's think about this for a second. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of speaking here in the building again, and I spoke of a leader who in this century refers to Armenians as dogs, whose regime refers to Armenians as vermin, who issued actual postage stamps foretelling the extermination of Nagorno-Karabakh, who publicly vowed on social media videos he posted to burn away the aura of Armenians. We've seen the videos of Armenian letters being scraped away from church walls by President Aliyev himself. Churches declared as Albanian, altars destroyed, elders executed, boys slaughtered, prisoners tormented and paraded. You just heard how he holds and tortures Armenian hostages. Now, why in the world would Aliyev want the third case, the case that is a stopgap measure to prevent genocide, eliminated? Why? Azerbaijan wants these cases abandoned because it can't win them. Because the orders and rulings in the case will undermine its manufactured narrative. Because to force its narrative on the world, it cannot be named, sometimes by the unanimous vote of the ICJ, as a perpetrator, as the aggressor, as the destroyer, as the one who's wrong. But most importantly, Azerbaijan wants these cases, the case specifically about the ICJ as a stopgap measure preventing genocide, Azerbaijan wants that case eliminated because Azerbaijan is not done. And this is why the peace terms initialed in Washington that Jared mentioned are so dangerous. They don't solve the conflict. They enable the next step. This is an enabling treaty. It's inviting future aggression. It is rewarding conquest, and it's codifying the fruits of ethnic cleansing as peace. It's appeasement in the mold of Munich. A temporary calm purchased at the cost of emboldening an aggressor whose ambitions are not satisfied. They are only encouraged. Again, the International Court of Justice has already found that Armenophobia is promoted from the highest levels of the Azerbaijani government. There is no room left about intent. So for Baku, the cases must go. Now, there's a camp that claims that Armenia must be realistic, that the past is the past and we must move forward. And I get that. I mean, it sounds like it's something that makes sense. But the unfortunate reality is that I am being absolutely realistic. Realism is that there is genocidal intent. And in the face of genocidal, and realism in the face of genocidal intent is not clearing the way for genocide. That's not realism. Realism recognizes that impunity breeds aggression, that unpunished crimes invite repetition, and that without accountability, there will be no peace, whether just or stable. Now, we've seen this pattern elsewhere. Srebrenica, the Rohingyas, and we know the same calculus applies when atrocity is tolerated and rewarded. Yesterday, Azerbaijan starved, deported, and executed. Today, it eliminates every trace of the Armenians from the land. You know, it's not enough for Azerbaijan to eliminate the people, the 4,000-year presence of Artsakh Armenians from the land of Artsakh. That's not enough. The ground itself has to be cleared. The cemeteries are being unearthed. Some of the oldest churches in the world are being destroyed and cleared to the ground. It's not enough to get rid of the people for Aliyev. And the churches they can't get rid of, we'll just call those Albanian. This is the reality. And it's broadcast on President Aliyev's and the Azerbaijani government's own social media channels. And Azerbaijan, it's rewarded with corridors for integration, Section 907 waivers, summit invitations. The lesson the aggressor takes from that is simple. Atrocity pays. Genocide is welcomed. Genocide is being invited. The international cases are a ledger of the truth. Every pleading, every provisional order, every judgment entered writes the facts into history. And these lines matter for the record, for restitution, for dignity of survivors, and most importantly, they matter for the prevention of the next atrocity. But hey, let's remove the legal stopgap measure altogether. By doing so, this peace has raised the cost of Armenia's own salvation. It's bid up the survival price. And this is really kind of the peculiar cognitive distortion of appeasement. We really want to believe that, if you just give that bully your lunch sandwich on Monday, it's going to stop. We know that doesn't work that way. You invite him for Tuesday and Wednesday. You feed it. You embolden it. You are part of the problem when you appease. And eventually, we end up where we are today. The absolutely absurd. Imagine, to get a just and durable peace, Armenia is being called to eliminate the decisions of the International Court of Justice. We have to get rid of the impartial decision of 15 jurists in opinions, a large majority of which are 13-2, 14-1, and 15-0 in favor of Armenia. We have to get rid of the justice in order to get a just and durable peace. We have to ignore the hostages. We have to pretend they're not there. We have to ignore the basic human right of return to your homeland. A peace treaty should be incorporating and integrating the decisions of the International Court of Justice, the truth, the law. That's how you get an agreement that conforms to justice. The withdrawal of Armenia's cases turns that principle flat on its head. It converts the law, justice, into an obstacle. Accountability into some bargaining chip, and justice into some sort of inconvenience. Justice is being showcased as an obstacle to peace. And I think this is why our work matters. We have to bridge the absurdity. We have to bring the cases that Azerbaijan now can't strong-arm the Armenian state to remove. And we have. There are corporate accountability actions against international multinational corporations who are aiding and abetting and profiting from Azerbaijan's taking and destruction of Artsakh. There are individual cases brought on behalf of the Artsakh Armenians against Azerbaijan, against companies, and you've heard of much of the good work that both Siranush and Jared are doing. And this is why the advocacy that's being done right here for the release of the 23 hostages and advocating for the right of return of Artsakh Armenians to their homes in security and dignity matters so much. Your work actually matters. Because what you're doing are obstacles to the horrendous atrocities that are literally right around the corner. Azerbaijan is not done. The taking of Artsakh was the beginning, not the end, of a process. and Azerbaijan has been green-lighted. The work you do here can change that. Demanding the right to the release of the hostages and demanding the right of return for Artsakh Armenians is a roadblock to those plans. It's a message to Aliyev that his campaign for the destruction of the Armenian state and the Armenian people cannot proceed like some sick, depraved sport. The work you do matters, and we will work with you in partnership to make sure that that work gets done. Thank you.
Thank you to our three panelists. I don't know how we, as Americans, can stand by and allow this to happen. We cannot be silent. Each one of us, in my view, has a moral obligation to do everything that we can to prevent this. I have a few questions for our panel. I would ask you to limit your answers to 1 or 2 minutes, because I have several questions. Jared, we've seen Trump administration officials more outspoken about the need for the release of POWs, and the recent State Department country report on Azerbaijan's human rights practices included explicit references to the 23 POWs and Artsakh's former political leadership. Can you share any insight into your engagement with the administration and how the administration is approaching this issue?
Sure. There's obviously only so much I can say publicly, but I will say that I've had regular and ongoing engagement with senior officials of the White House, as well as the State Department on all of these issues. Undoubtedly, they want to do the right thing and they want to get, the Armenian Christian prisoners home. Originally they were talking about trying to have it happen, not in the peace agreement, because the draft never included anything on this from the very, very beginning of the process, but ideally at the same time as the signing of the agreement. And obviously that strategy wasn't possible to execute. But I do think that, I'm sure Anka and all of us were urging the White House when this agreement was going to be signed to make sure in one way or another that the prisoner issue came up. We were pushing very, very hard, the right people at the White House, along with, again, many of you, to make sure that happened. And I think it's historic and critically important that President Trump personally took this on and confirmed with Pashinyan that he would ask Aliyev to get them out. And now that he's made that public commitment, it's about holding the administration accountable to that. I don't think he's going to want to let them out, of course. I've already warned the administration that he's going to want to let some of them out, but not others out, right? And they all need to come out, and that's obviously critically important. And there's still a long way to go to kind of get this done. But I will say that in the discussions I've had since the signing of the agreement, they remain focused on this very intensely, and I think the fact that you saw it in the State Department Human Rights reports only reinforces the fact that on this issue, the administration, is very much united. The messages I'm hearing from the White House and the State Department are the same and well coordinated, and I do believe that they are prepared to move forward. Whether they're prepared to put on the kind of pressure needed to make it happen quickly is a different question, and that's what we all have to work on.
And this is where your involvement in each of the congressional offices makes a difference, because the administration will respond to congressional pressure. We saw that during the Biden administration. In the last 2 years, they did not provide waivers of Section 907, and that was solely because of congressional pressure. So again, each of us can do something about this, and we look to our friends in Congress and the House and the Senate to do so. Senators, throughout your time on the Hill this week, we've been cautioning about a provision in the draft peace deal that would force Armenia to withdraw its legal cases that Carnegie has discussed against Azerbaijan before the International Court of Justice. What would be the implications that this would have on the POWs specifically if these cases are withdrawn?
Of course, we are representing many POWs, but the majority of them are already returned. So out of 23 prisoners, 22 are represented by Armenian government through this interstate case, and just one prisoner is represented by us. So this will close the legal avenues for protecting the rights of prisoners. So this would mean elimination of justice and protection for the prisoners. Because the release of prisoners is not part of this peace deal, there would be no other political or legal undertaking for Aliyev regime to release them. We find this very dangerous because the fate will be left fully at the mercy of Azerbaijani government. And with this poor reputation, poor human rights record, we cannot rely on their good faith activities. And this is the reason why Armenian society sees a resolution of the release of Armenian prisoners as a precondition for any meaningful peace process. Without their release, Armenian society cannot give credibility, trust to these peace processes, and any unresolved humanitarian issue just causes additional harm and sufferings to Armenian victims who were within the past years deprived of their main rights and denied justice. So it's very important to have this issue resolved before completing this peace deal. There are, of course, some possibilities to mobilize the efforts and continue some of the legal struggle through individual steps. Our colleagues are discussing some strategies not to leave Armenian prisoners without legal protection.
If these cases are withdrawn by Armenia, as likely will be, really the only efforts to protect the rights of Artsakh Armenians and the POWs are going to be through private efforts, through the Armenian Legal Center, through private attorneys like Jared, through the efforts of Carnegie and his colleagues. So it's important to support what they do. Carnegie, in addition to failing to provide for the release of the POWs, the peace agreement also neglects the fundamental right of Armenians to return, as we've discussed. Recently, you filed a case against a UK company. I was wondering if you could comment on that and how that plays into this.
Sure. Given the impending withdrawal of these cases, if that actually materializes, which it looks like it will, I think it's really important that what we have to do from the legal standpoint is to be able to insulate rights and causes of action and diversify the mechanisms that we use in order to achieve outcomes. And so that, corporate accountability is part of that story. It's one that we've kind of ignored for quite some time. I think a lot of lawyers and in the environmental rights world, corporate accountability is seen as a real route to change. In the human rights world, perhaps because of just the flood of human rights violations that the world has seen over the last decade, that hasn't been used as much as it should. And this is kind of the area that we're working in, and kind of a news flash. At one point, somewhere along the line, we came to the conclusion that, wait a minute, perpetrators don't actually care about human rights. That's why they commit the crimes. They don't care about it. So chasing them on human rights matters is one direction, but you also have to attack them where it actually matters. How they profit from war crimes, how they profit from ethnic cleansing, how they profit from genocide, how they profit from appropriation of people's properties. So we have found various mechanisms that we use for corporate accountability, and we've had quite a bit of success using them against corporate entities, and it's an avenue that now we're going to kind of double down on and expand that. In fact, there's one of our colleagues here, where is she, Margarita, who's done quite a bit of work, there she is, done quite a bit of work with us on this front. And it makes a real difference because it attacks the corporations in the place where it matters to them. And so I think that the corporate accountability is kind of the new front for human rights, and I expect more work to be done in that area.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we're going to take one question from the audience. I'm going to recognize Robert Avedikian, who's the long-standing representative of Nagorno-Karabakh to the United States government. Robert, did you have a question for the panel?
Question? Yes, thank you very much. I want to say thank you for dedicating your time and passion and expertise, especially for the non-Armenian members of this united front, which is really a civilizational fight. And thank you for sharing your insight. We heard a lot from the legal/political viewpoint, so to say. If you don't mind, I would like to invite everyone to go back to fundamentals a little bit, right? We have folks in the room who are not necessarily privy to all these details. It's our passion, it's our life, it's our everything. But as they go back to their bosses today, their bosses will ask them, what is this? Because they're gonna hear a lot about all this is to derail the peace process, which is very fragile, right? We can assume that the opposers of whatever we're discussing today will be coming up to the same offices and say, this is to derail peace process. This is to kind of attack what that fragile politics which is happening. I wonder if you can kind of wrap up. I know that all of you kind of skimmed through this, but I want this message to be sent, please, clearly to everyone who has still questions about this. What does it mean for the peace process to continue this sham trial? And by the way, all those faces are exactly the answer why Artsakh went with self-determination. Because as soon as Azerbaijan can have the opportunity to deal with Armenians, this is exactly what is expected. For our strive to dare for democracy, freedom, or self-governance. So I think that kind of, these people are the daily reminder of the Artsakh liberation movement. Can you please wrap it up? Is this an effort to prolong peace process? What will that mean for the peace process to keep this sham trial going without any American interference? Because we have no doubt that every American politician and every sober politician around the world would be for peace, and we are all for peace. And what it will mean for the process to continue allowing Azerbaijan to use this to poison anti-Armenian sentiments across the society. So pretty much, what is this for the peace process? Is this something that will derail the peace process, or is this something, because the peace process is not only not the leadership, right? It's the populations.
Thank you, Robert. We only have time for one response. Jared?
Sure. Well, and of course, you'll be not surprised to hear that I fully agree with you. I think it's important to emphasize that the detention of these prisoners, especially the political prisoners, was part of the plan of the completion of the ethnic cleansing. Right? It wasn't enough to just displace the entire population and to erase the history and culture of the Armenian people in Nagorno-Karabakh, but you needed to decapitate their leadership, the people that were most outspoken and most effective at advocating for them around the world. Because without those high-profile voices, right, it's much harder to get people's attention. So there can be no actual sustained peace without justice. The one piece of good news here is, of course, the president himself having said that he's going to make their release a priority. And it was said to me by multiple officials over the last number of months that when I was expressing enormous fear and concern for my client and that of the other prisoners, that we understand why you wanted it to be at the time of the peace agreement itself. And I was explaining how this would require Armenia to withdraw all these cases in international tribunals. And what was emphasized to me and really stuck with me was they're telling me, we understand that. We understand why this is not ideal. But you need to understand now that this has become a bilateral issue between the United States and Azerbaijan. And we are going to treat it as a bilateral issue. And there's nothing in the peace agreement that in any way inhibits the United States from doing whatever it wants in any way that it wants and sending whatever messages it wants with regards to the urgent need to release the prisoners. So there's a long way between where we are and getting to that. And undoubtedly, this does nothing at all for the return of the residents of Nagorno-Karabakh back to their territory, back to Nagorno-Karabakh, or obviously providing as an alternative any compensation for the enormous damages that they've suffered. But I do think that, for better or worse, Aliyev now has a good working relationship with the president. And I think that because of the strong support we have on Capitol Hill for the release of the prisoners, because of the religious organizations across faiths that are engaged in these issues and so forth, the president is going to want to get this done. And so it's our job to be the proverbial bad cop to the president trying to be the good cop here, and we need to reinvigorate all of our efforts around the world.
Thank you. I want to make one quick comment about self-determination. How many members are there in the United Nations today? 193. All of you should have known that, by the way. Here's a hard question. How many members were there in 1960?
No, 40 something or 50 something.
100.
100.
Where did those 93 countries come from? People who wanted to govern themselves. No different than the United States, no different than those other 93 countries. The Armenians of Artsakh, of Nagorno-Karabakh, want the right to self-determination. This is not a novel request. This is not something that's unprecedented. In the last 65 years, 93 people have succeeded in that. One never would have predicted that in 1960. Most of you were not born then, but that has happened. I want to thank our panelists. I want to invite Adam Amparian, the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America, to give closing remarks.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you all for being here. There's a lot of work ahead of us. You may have heard that, I think Ken mentioned that Congressman Dina Titus was joined by Congressman Gus Bilirakis in introducing legislation that addresses many of these concerns. Senator Markey on the Senate side is joining with Senator Whitehouse in a letter to Secretary Rubio, which again talks about the release of prisoners and the return of Armenians to Artsakh. So we're working on both those initiatives and many, many others. We invite all of your support, and thank you very sincerely from our hearts for being here. Thank you to Carney, to Jared, to Cedar Notion, of course, to Ken. Thank you all.
Thank you.